Hi, so this is Gay again. We're beginning with part 3, and we're on to point 5 in the bullets taken from It's Not a Game, It's War, on the letters 4 page at WisdomAboveGold.com. Now, I was in the middle of point 5, and I stopped because I want to explain what the diaspora was all about, okay? Let me give you a quick overview of biblical history. By the way, I'm reading from a page I have on the letters 4 page, and it's called Why the Diaspora, and it has biblical history in bullet form. So if you choose to read the Old Testament, it will help you. Okay. What happens is, I'm not going to get into, the father of the Israelite nation was Abraham. Abraham bears Isaac. Isaac bears Jacob. And Jacob has 12 sons, which constitute the house of Israel. In a nutshell. A couple of variations, not important right now. Jacob and his family have to relocate to Egypt during a famine. And they locate in a city of Egypt, not a city, outside of the city, called Goshen, a suburb. I don't know that you'd call it a suburb, but an area where they can have their sheep, because they're sheep herders. But what happens is, the Pharaoh that invited them dies. And eventually another Pharaoh comes along. I don't know if it's the next generation or several later, but he doesn't have an affinity with the Hebrews, and he's threatened by them. He's afraid that their numbers have grown out of bounds, and that if they ever wanted to war against him, he might lose. So what he chooses to do is enslave them, to have them build cities, and he's hoping he's going to wear them down and then they'll die off. Very similar to what happened in World War II, isn't it? Anyway, the opposite occurs. They proliferate. They get stronger. So at a certain point, he says, well, let's just kill the male babies. And one of the Hebrew women has a baby. After 3 months, she puts him in a basket in the Nile River. She doesn't allow him to be drowned. She puts him in a basket, and the baby is picked up by Pharaoh's daughter and adopted as her son. And that, of course, is Moses. And Moses gets a top-notch aristocratic education. But when he's about 40 years old, he kills a Roman soldier for having attacked a Hebrew slave. And so he has to go into hiding. He goes into the land of Midian, and he gets married, he has children, and he spends 40 years there, quiet life. When he's 80, God approaches him in a burning bush and tells him that he's been selected to save his people. So he goes back to Egypt, and you know the story, if anyone's ever watched the movie about the 10 Commandments, God afflicts the pharaohs until they release the Hebrew nation. The last affliction is when God kills all of the firstborn in Egypt. And so the Israelites leave that night. That's Passover night, leaving bondage to freedom. The Israelites get as far as the Red Sea, and they're stopped. Pharaoh changed his mind, goes after them with chariots. God opens up the Red Sea, the Israelites walk across, the Egyptians try to follow, and they're engulfed by the closing of the Red Sea. Now, the Israelites are in the desert, and God has them, He has them focused on Him. He comes to them again every night in a pillar of fire and a cloud by day, and He speaks to them. He's trying to re-educate them. He's trying to get their mentality of bondage reversed. But He's not able to do it with the first generation. And that's unfortunate. So they have to spend 40 years in the desert until another generation comes up that doesn't have the same problems. Things happen while they're there. Moses creates a system of judges. It's known as the Sanhedrin. He trains men, sometimes judges are women, to handle disputes, to learn God's laws of morality and ethics, and to handle the disputes in their community. And so that's one thing that's very important for you to understand, the existence of the Sanhedrin. And of course, the judges are getting their training directly from God Himself. Very interesting, no? Now, prior to entering the Promised Land, God gives the people a blessing. But not only does He give them a blessing, He gives them a curse. He gives them a blessing if they obey His commandments, and a curse if they do not. Now, this may sound very, very harsh and controlling, but understand, God was trying to rescue all of humanity, and He really needed these people to comply. They didn't fully understand what their burden was. They didn't understand it. It was far too premature for Him to divulge it to them. But that was the plan. So understand God's position. Let's see, give me a minute. They enter the Promised Land, and the system of judges, or the Sanhedrin, remains in place for quite a while, until Samuel. Samuel is a priest. Now, for most of that time, the priests, the Levitical priests, were the ones that were the judges for the people. But the priesthood became corrupted, and that was a problem. And finally, the people said, we don't want judges anymore. We want a king. So the first king that was anointed was Saul from the tribe of Benjamin. But, there had never been a king in the land before, and Saul didn't know how to do it. So he had to be replaced, and he was replaced with David, who was from the tribe of Judah. And that's important to understand because that's affecting us today. The fact that the kingship line of Judah is the line through which Christ will return, and He will be the eternal king. So the line of Judah has a lot of promise, and we don't know the half of it. So what else can I tell you? Oh yeah, so David's son, David doesn't build God a temple, his son does, Solomon. Solomon builds God a temple, and because, there were promises, wait a minute, I'm jumping ahead with Solomon. There were promises God gave David. God promised David that his line would be an eternal kingship, that through him would come the Messiah. And David was very much a prophet. He prophesied the coming of Christ. He prophesied the crucifixion of Christ. If you don't believe me, read Psalm 22. But God also promised David that there would always be a king through his line in every generation, and that's important to understand. I'm not going to deal with it now, but I will give you a source to read where you can read about the significance of that. So David's son, Solomon, had all of the promises, and he built the temple of God, this great temple. On the day the temple was built or dedicated, God gave Solomon wonderful blessing. However, he also gave him a curse. And Solomon, unfortunately, in later life, incurred the curse. Okay, Solomon married 700 strange women. He had 300 concubines. These were women from around the world, and he ended up worshiping other gods. He got involved in all sorts of occult practice. In fact, I'll throw this out. That's what the Knights Templar, that's what they were searching for. The hidden secrets of Solomon's temple. There were occult mysteries hidden there. And it's believed that the Knights Templar of Europe discovered all of that material, brought it back to Europe, and started the secret society of Freemasonry, and with their mission to take over the world, the architects of the world. That's out of which this New World Order came. Okay? So you understand that. I'm not going to focus on the satanic agenda. God the Creator has an agenda far more important and relevant to you and I. So, the kingship could not go through Solomon. How God resolved this, I have described in another writing. It's called The Messiah's Lineage. I suggest you read it. Very important. I think you can find it on the Letters 2 page at Wisdom Above Gold. But right now I'm going to stick to this thread right here, okay? Solomon's son, Rehoboam, when he was being crowned king, had a visit by a man, Jeroboam. Jeroboam was from the tribe of Ephraim. And Jeroboam said to Rehoboam, "Look, your father Solomon made our lives very difficult with hard bondage. Can we count on you not to repeat that mistake?" Rehoboam says, "Come back in 3 days." Rehoboam gets bad advice from young people. And when Jeroboam returns, Rehoboam says, my father was difficult, I'm going to be more difficult. And so Jeroboam says, forget about it. I'm taking the 10 tribes of Israel that have nothing to do with your house, and I'm taking them north. And that's what happened. Jeroboam created a capital city for the 10 northern tribes in Shechem at first. Later, the capital city moved to Samaria. The problem is this. Jeroboam was afraid that the people of his newly formed kingdom would return to Jerusalem on the holy days to do their sacrifices and pray to God from Jerusalem, the holy city. So to prevent this, he built 2 golden calves. One he put in the city of Bethel, one he put in Dan. More than that is he created a holy day, his own holy day, in the 8th month. And of course, the Levitical priests were appalled and returned to Judah, making Judah spiritually more powerful, more in favor with God. In order to get a priesthood, Jeroboam takes on priests from anyone who would give him a bribe. So he got all of these corrupt people to form his own priesthood. And of course, the 10 northern tribes fell completely out of favor with God. 3 times God tried to wipe out the corrupt nation, the corrupt kingships, and each time the society was so entrenched with pagan practice that the conquering king himself would succumb. One of the kings, Ahab, even married a witch. She was a Zidonian princess called Jezebel. So there was a lot of occult practice in the 10 northern tribes. Down in Jerusalem, because the Levitical priesthood had returned, there were good, kings that obeyed God and then kings that did evil. So it would flip, the good king, the bad king, the good king, the bad king, the good king, the bad king. That's the way it went in Jerusalem. So Jerusalem lasted a little longer than the northern territory. Eventually, God gave up and had the Assyrian Empire conquer Samaria, or the 10 northern tribes, and carry them away to all parts of the world. All parts of the Assyrian Empire. Now, the reason, of course, the king of Assyria needed to disperse them was because the house of Israel was warrior class. So he had to make sure that they couldn't regroup and retaliate. And so you have the diaspora, this scattering of the Jews. Now, those 10 tribes never returned to Israel. Never. They lost their identity. They had lost their identity while they were still in Samaria. And today, you're speaking about a massive group of people who have no idea of who they are. Okay? And I will make the case for you later that the tribe of Ephraim got their own blessing, actually a birthright. And that birthright is what we call America. But I'll get to that later. Meantime, the Judeans were degenerating in their relationship with God. So 120 years later, by then the Babylonian Empire had conquered the Assyrian Empire, and Babylonia, under King Nebuchadnezzar, went into Jerusalem and destroyed the city, carried away the tribe of Judah. Remember, that was the tribe of Judah. Now, I'm not going to get into why, but the Benjamites were with the tribe of Judah. If you want to know why, read the end of the book of Judges. It will explain. But the Benjamites were with the Judeans and most of the Levitical priests. They were carried into the Babylonian territory. Again, they were dispersed, but they only remained 70 years because there were people among this group that never got involved in pagan practice. And 10% of these people, the remnant it's called, were returned to Jerusalem after a 70-year period and rebuilt the temple. And these people are the ones we call Jews today. 90% of the Judeans never returned, and a hefty portion of these people lost their identity and ended up, following other gods. So you see, only 10% of the people who lived in Jerusalem know who they had any hope of knowing who they were, even after, well, I shouldn't put it that way, I'm getting lost here. Only 10% of Jerusalem returned back then. That's what I mean to say. So we're talking about the entire 10 tribes and 90% of the tribes from Jerusalem having lost their identity as part of the house of Israel. They're still out there. But God promised a divine regathering of the entire house of Israel. That's what you must understand. Now, one other thing, this scattering and loss of identity could never have completed, for as long as these people retained their ability to perceive the supernatural, to have eyes to see and ears to hear. So they were blinded and deafened. Okay? Now, I will make the case down the road that this was necessary, actually, for God to release information to the entire world regarding salvation, that this was God's plan B. We'll get to that later. I think I'm going to end it here. I'll be moving on to point 6 in the next recording. Talk to you soon. Bye.